good and unalloyed intelligence. Perfect intelligence is to render service unto the Lord. One should be intelligent enough to understand that the living being is in all circumstances a servant of the circumstances. Every living being is serving the dictates of desire, anger, lust, illusion, insanity, and enviousness, all materially affected. But even while executing such dictations of different temperaments, he is perpetually unhappy. When one actually feels this and turns his intelligence to inquiring about it from the right sources, he gets information of the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Instead of serving materially for the above-mentioned different humors of the body, the living entity's intelligence then becomes freed from the unhappy illusion of materialistic temperament, and thus by unalloyed intelligence his mind is brought into the service of the Lord. The Lord and his service are identical, being on the absolute plane. Therefore, the unalloyed intelligence and mind are merged into the Lord, and thus the living entity does not remain a seer himself, but becomes seen by the Lord transcendentally. When the living entity is directly seen by the Lord dictates to him to act according to his desire, and when the living entity follows him perfectly, the living entity ceases to discharge any other duty for his illusory satisfaction. In his pure, unalloyed state, the living being attains the stage of full bliss, labdhopa shanti, and seizes all material hankerings. Om Ajnanatamidandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadandikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Takara Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagna Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitanscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchani Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vikasa Swami Nitinamine Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitinamine Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Vaschatya Deshatarine Vanchaka Padrovishcha Kripa Sindhuvi Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Translation again. Thereafter the yogi should merge his mind by his unalloyed intelligence into the living entity, and then merge the living entity into the super self. And by doing this, the fully satisfied living entity becomes situated in the supreme stage of satisfaction, so that he ceases from all other activities. So if I'm not mistaken, this is Shukadeva Goswami speaking to Parikshit Maharaj. Yeah. So it's a very interesting section of the Bhagavatam, because it seems very kind of mystical. We're kind of imagining, this very mystic sage teaching Parikshit Maharaj how to leave his body in a very mystical way, merging his mind, and kind of, it seems very kind of abstract, but in Prabhupada's purport, we see that this is very practical instruction. Actually, through Prabhupada's purport, we can understand the instructions of Shukadeva Goswami in a very practical way, where it's not just some kind of theoretical thing where we're imagining our mind to become merged in our intelligence, and our intelligence to become merged in our soul, and like that. Srila Prabhupada, he says in that recording in that happening record in the early days, that this Krishna consciousness is not an artificial imposition on the mind. So it's not that this is something which is imagined, many kinds of like meditation or pseudo spiritual practices, they use similar kind of I guess you can call them like tools, things to like meditate upon while you're meditating. I remember back in the day, I had a buddy who would, we had like a meditation club at our college and go through this book, and the book had so many different things which you can meditate on. You meditate on like the light of a candle, or meditate on your thoughts, and then label your thoughts and put them into categories, or when you really get into it, you try to start meditating on nothingness. But to meditate on nothingness, you have to have some kind of something to meditate on to bring you to that state of nothingness. So then they have what's called koans in Buddhism, what's called koan. So it's kind of like tools to kind of bring your mind to thinking of nothingness. One of them is to meditate on the sound of one hand clapping. It's a very famous one. And I remember whenever we got to that one, my Buddhist friend there, he read it and, oh yes, this is very nice. And then I went, and I thought, what's the big deal of that? It's the sound of one hand clapping. This doesn't seem very special. But this isn't one of those koans. This isn't meant to be interpreted as such, even though some may interpret like that. To merge the mind with the intelligence, to merge the intelligence with the soul. It seems very vague and very kind of abstract and very mystical, and it kind of has that attractiveness to it. But Srila Prabhupada, he makes this very practical by explaining how we can control our mind using refined intelligence, and then having controlled the mind, then we're able to control our senses, we're able to engage our body in proper activity. So what is that proper activity? So being guided by proper intelligence, ultimately engaging our very self in the service of the Lord. Then Prabhupada explains that because the Lord is non-different from his service, then that is the true meaning of what it means to be merged into the Lord. The true meaning of what it means to merge our mind, intelligence, and our self with the Lord. So this is the real meaning, and all throughout the Vedic literatures we have similar statements like this, and it's almost covered by kind of an illusory, it's very easy to misinterpret, especially in texts like the Upanishads, which are very technical, and the language used there can be interpreted in many different ways. So then different teachers, different gurus, they can extract kind of different meanings from that, and then in that way there's many different sampradayas, many different schools of thought. You have the 6 different schools of Vedic Shad Darshan. So you have the Vedanta, then you have the Sankhya, Mimamsa, so on and so forth. There's 6 of them. And many times people, they kind of think, okay, these 6 are there, all 6 are valid, and you can kind of choose which one you want to go for. And then even among those different schools, you have different teachers, and then among those teachers you have different ideas which they're presenting, like Vedanta, for instance. A lot of people, whenever you just kind of mention Vedanta, especially in India, for those who are scholars of this, for those who understand a little bit and have studied it, immediately you think of Shankaracharya, Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. And Vedanta, Shankara was actually kind of following in the line of someone called Ashtavakra Muni, who kind of extracted a Mayavad conception of the Vedanta Sutras, and then like that Shankaracharya kind of followed like that. So in that way, it's almost as if the Mayavadis have created a monopoly on Vedanta, and their understanding of such verses like this that we find in the Srimad Bhagavatam would be vastly different than those of the Vaishnavacharyas like Ramanuja, Madhvacharya, and of course later on Mahaprabhu, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and Srila Prabhupada. So is it that this verse is meant to be interpreted in whatever way you like, and there might be many different meanings to it, and everyone's right in their own way, and we have the devotees of Krishna, and they have their right to do that, but they can't say that that's the only way, and the truth and the light. And there's so many different opportunities. Is that the case? Is our teachers just kind of extracting kind of a perverted meaning? Srila Prabhupada is often criticized, especially for his translation of the Bhagavad Gita, for giving a very narrow-minded understanding of the Gita. He writes as it is, almost as if he's very kind of proud that he has understood the only meaning of the Gita, whenever there can be so many understandings. So it's often criticized like that. So is that the case? Obviously not. I think that sitting here we wouldn't feel like that. But we should be able to kind of articulate this. And not that we're just kind of blindly following and we just see that Prabhupada says that's how it is, so that's how it is. Of course that works for us, and among our community that's really good pramana. Oh, Prabhupada said, so we should do it. Everybody will listen. But if we're trying to explain this to somebody else, say somebody who's really into Ashtanga Yoga, and their interpretation of this is kind of based on yoga is like a whole darshan of the Vedic, and by Patanjali Yoga Sutras, they'll have a completely different understanding of this. So, anyways, the point is that although you can have so many different interpretations of this, Srimad Bhagavatam offers the Siddhanta, the perfect conclusion, where all of these other so-called Siddhantas, actually Siddhanta means bhakti, but other so-called antas, other so-called kind of conclusions of Vedic knowledge, ultimately come to bhakti. And even things like Ashtanga Yoga, Karma Mimamsa, Vaisheshikavad, these things are kind of like lost, not so much very common anymore. But all of these things, they find their perfection and they find their harmony with all the Vedic teachings in the form of bhakti. So that's why even in texts like the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks a lot about Ashtanga Yoga. And if you see Prabhupada's translations and his commentaries on that, it's not that he really strays very far away. It's not that he strays far at all from the message of pure devotional service. So for one whose eyes have been smeared with the love of God, then they can kind of see the all-pervasive message of bhakti all throughout the Vedic literatures. So yeah, this Ashtanga, this idea of sitting in one place, merging one's senses and mind and body and everything with the elements, and kind of attaining a state of one-pointed meditation, all these things. The perfection of that is to be 100% engaged in meditation upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and to be engaged in 100% meditation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, especially in this age of Kali. The most effective means of that is by chanting the holy names, by serving the Lord through different methods, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevam. So it's actually non-different. The conclusion of bhakti and the conclusion of Ashtanga Yoga is meant to come to the same point, that we should meditate upon, we should worship, we should serve, we should become merged with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the mind, how do we become an expert yogi? The mind is always kind of, as Prabhupada writes, the functions of the mind are thinking, feeling, and willing. And whenever we're in a material consciousness, we're affected by the modes of material nature. What is the mind engaged in doing these for? We have this Purusha Prakriti Stohi Bhunte Prakritir Jan Gunam Karanam Guna Sangosya Sarasadyoni Janmasu. So because of our desire to enjoy this Prakriti, and because of our association with that, Karanam Guna Sangha, because it's caused by our association with the gunas of the Tamogun, Rajagun, Sattvagun. Because of our association with these gunas, then we're forced to accept different forms of life and Sat and Asat yonis, meaning we might have very abominable forms of life like animals, or other sinful beings, and we might have very good forms of life, like the demigods and the Gandharvas. And in all walks of life, we're also equipped with a mind. So you see that the mind of like a monkey and the mind of like a great sage might appear to be very different, or the mind of a human being. You know, the psychology of animals is probably something that is studied, but probably not very well understood, because there's so many different species of animals, and in every single species they have their own psychology, they have their own nature, they have their own instinctive kind of like impulses, things like that. And that's because in every walk of life, the living entity is given the opportunity to pursue their material desires, so they're given the tools to do so. So the mind is another one of those senses. It's another one of the tools by which we use to exploit this material nature. What is that verse in the 7th chapter that talks about that? Apareyam etastvanyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhuta mahabaho yedam taryate jagat. Does it say?
Yeah, they're exploiting the resources.
Yeah. So beyond this material energy, you have the spiritual energy. Apareyam etastvanyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhuta mahabaho. So the jivas, they're constantly, the living entities, they're engaged in exploiting the lower energies, the prakriti. So that's the main function of the mind in all different walks of life, all different species. So the functions of thinking, feeling, and willing are 100% engaged in what we believe to be service to ourself. We think that if we think about how we can get food, and we have the will to get food, and we really feel hungry, and if we engage our mind in such a way, then we can serve ourselves. We can become happy in this way. We will become peaceful once we get the food, which means that the mind is dictating everything. Whenever the mind feels something, and then whenever the mind thinks something and wills to do something, then immediately all the other senses of the body become the mind's servant. Like that. It's like the big boss. Which means that the intelligence is serving these thinking, feeling, and willing of the mind. So whenever we develop a desire to eat some pizza, we smell some nice pizza, the mind starts meditating on that, how wonderful it would be. I would be so happy once I get the pizza. So then the intelligence becomes a very humble servant of the mind, and then the intelligence starts to plot so many different plans by which we can execute this desire. And we come up with so many extraordinary plans. How can I get some pizza? And now it's very easy. It's just a matter of kind of going on your phone and clicking a few buttons, and the next thing you know, you got pizza at your door. But for maybe bigger desires, more complicated desires, I mean, it's just like unlimited how the human being uses, not just the human being, every living entity uses their intelligence in so many previously unimagined ways in order to satisfy the desires of the mind. We have they're sending rockets up to space. They just had one explode. You saw that? Blue Origin? Billions and billions of dollars just down the drain.
Where did it explode?
I think in Florida was where they launched it.
Recently? Cape Canaveral?
I'm not sure.
Recently?
Yeah, just a few days ago.
It exploded just as it
Just
took off?
before it didn't even take off. It just they lit the engines, and then on the radar, on the weather radar, it created a whole. It was like a massive. It was the biggest rocket explosion in history. And it like damaged other facilities, and that.
Nobody got hurt?
I don't think so. I think it was an unmanned rocket, but it damaged a bunch of things, and it looks like all the money that went into that project went for a waste. But we all know that all that money went in different guys' pockets, and they're walking away, and now they don't have to worry about producing any AI images of what they found in space, and etc. etc. Anyways. So their intelligence became very expert at fulfilling the hankering of the mind pulling in this way. Very interesting thinking, feeling, and willing of the mind to go to go to outer space and explore the other planets. But we see that this is a very common is a very common thing, which happens with the demoniac people in this world. We have cases like Ravana, Hiranyakashipu, very interested in becoming bigger, and becoming more elevated, and extending their power beyond their body, beyond their country, beyond their world. They want to become the ruler of the entire universe. So if we have the facilities, in other words, if we have the intelligence, then there's practically unlimited ways which we can pursue our material desires in this world. And the Lord, in the form of His external energy, He gives all facility. He gives us incredible intelligence, and so many great examples. Albert Einstein and who was the one? Stephen Hawking. These are renowned people. And then you look in their personal life. I think Stephen Hawking was on the Epstein files, going to the private island to do all sorts of who knows what over there. So these are the most intelligent people in the world, and we see that they're just completely, their intelligence is completely enslaved to just the pullings of their mind, the desires of their mind. But the Bhagavad Gita explains, Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, that in its proper condition, the intelligence is supposed to be superior to the mind. The intelligence is supposed to tell the mind what to do. And whenever the mind starts having its own desires, whenever the thinking, feeling, and willing becomes separate from that of the intelligence, then the intelligence is supposed to be strong enough to cut that off. Say, no, I'm the boss here. But as it is right now, for one whose senses are uncontrolled, for one who doesn't have proper intelligence, purified intelligence, then the moment that some kind of desire comes up, automatically we just start to pursue that. Especially nowadays when we have these things and everything's so quick and easy, there's hardly any cost. It doesn't hardly cost anything to just get a little bit of sense gratification right at the tips of your finger. But in the proper condition of life, the intelligence is supposed to call the shots, and which means that the intelligence must be purified and it must be situated in reality. So even if we're extremely intelligent, and even if we might even kind of make a show of being very sense-controlled, if the intelligence still isn't guiding the senses and the mind to engage in the devotional service of the Lord, then it's still considered to be animal intelligence. You can't really go beyond simply kind of going through the motions of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, unless your intelligence is engaged in some kind of spiritual pursuit. So this is what separates the human being from the animals. They're given the facility to have that kind of refined intelligence. You don't find that in any other lower species of life. And even though the human life is very short, it's very temporary, and we never really know when we're going to die, still we're given this opportunity to develop our intelligence, to point us in the right direction. So by the process of chanting the holy names, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, cleansing the mirror of the mind and honing in the intelligence to direct at the lotus feet, serving the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, then we can achieve the purpose of the human form of life by strengthening our intelligence, which means having a firm faith in the words of the spiritual master, in the words of the Vedic scriptures, and having faith in the guidance of the devotees. So having such intelligence, and then merging the mind into fully cooperating with that intelligence, and then merging the body and all of its senses and fully cooperating with the mind, which is cooperating with that intelligence. This is the way that we can truly serve ourself. This is the way that we can become truly satisfied and truly happy. yasyatma suprasidati. There's a few verses like that in the second chapter of the Bhagavatam which explain that simply by performing this devotional service one can actually become peaceful and happy. You won't be able to achieve that. There's no amount of sense gratification where once we do it we'll feel okay, I think that's enough and I'm fully satisfied now. So that is what it actually means to merge the mind and intelligence with Krishna. And whenever one has reached that transcendental platform, being fully surrendered to the Lord, then, as we were discussing in our own Bhagavatam classes back in Davis, such a person becomes practically non-different from the Lord. Being completely merged with the desire of the Lord, it is said that the Lord identifies his servant with his very self. He takes full responsibility for that servant, meaning that all of his past karma just completely vanishes, and then all of his future activities are completely free from any kind of karma. The Lord takes full responsibility for him, and not only that, he dictates from within the heart of that devotee how to act and what to do, as if he's like his own limb. It's like it's part of his own body. So like that, we can become merged with the Lord. We can become on the same spiritual platform as the Lord. Of course, the Lord retains his quantity of spiritual opulence. The living entity can come to the same quality of spiritual opulence, but the quantity of the Lord's is inconceivably more infinite. But like that, we can merge into the blissful nature of the Lord and engage eternally in his devotional service. It's a pretty high thing, but it starts with honing in our intelligence, reading Prabhupada's books every day, chanting, and a very important thing which is often overlooked by many devotees in the society today is not contaminating our intelligence by eating all sorts of nonsense which is cooked by non-devotees. Mahaprabhu himself says that one who eats food which is cooked by non-devotees, their mind becomes like stool. And if one's, maybe, I don't know the exact words that are used, his intelligence becomes like stool. And if you don't have, Mahaprabhu says, if you don't have good intelligence, then you can't think of Krishna. So if you're always eating karmi grains and food cooked outside, then how are you going to think of Krishna? Simple things like this, if we just adjust in our life, design our life in such a way to where we can have prasadam regularly, we can associate with devotees regularly, we can read Prabhupada's books regularly, we can have time set aside and chant our rounds and everything. And that way, this is real intelligence. If we start planning our lives like this, engaging our mind and senses in the service of the Lord, then this is a very practical way by which we can come up to this super, super high level which we're talking about of merging with Krishna and all that stuff. So, long way to go, but Prabhupada gave us the path. He gave us all the rocket fuel to kind of go on that path. And as long as we don't explode like the Blue Origin, then we should make a lot of progress very quickly. So I'll finish there. There's a little bit of time if anyone has any questions, comments.
Does anyone have any questions online?
That's good.
Okay, we'll finish there then. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai,
Yay.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
One Chakrapathi Srila Bhagavatam ki jai.